Hello everyone, and today we are going to be looking a little bit deeper into Cthulhu Confidential. We're going to look at the first scenario from this. Just a quick breakdown if you don't know. Cthulhu Confidential is a film noir style RPG with Cthulhu mythos influences. It is made for one player and one GM or game master, and it uses the Gumshoe one-to-one system. If you want to know more about this, please check my other video which describes it in much more detail. So this review will have three parts. It will look at the character, the city, the setting, and then the scenario. There will only be minor spoilers for the character and the city. Players, I think you can feel free to watch those. And I'll give a warning before we move on, a spoiler warning, before we move on to the actual scenario. But if you're a player and you want to just avoid any kind of information before the scenario, please stop watching now and send this to your GM. So our first scenario takes place in Hardboiled L.A. in 1937. And our main character, the player character, will be Dex Raymond. And he is described as an archetypal, hard-boiled private investigator who prowls the haunted streets of Cthulhu Confidential Los Angeles as an outsider by choice. With his smarts and grits, he could be a part of the corrupt establishment. Instead, he prefers to operate on its fringes, setting himself up in a crummy office to solve problems the bought and sold police department can't be relied on to care about. Excuse me. So we get a brief outline of his character with a few friends outside of his sources. But his one real friend of note is a police contact, Ted Gargan. So before we move on to the sources, the players are asked to answer a few questions which help flesh out the character a little bit more. And so those questions are, so Dex is acting as an outsider. Why did he choose this? Why did he choose this this lifestyle? And also some background questions for your players to answer. Did he briefly attend the police academy, quitting when he was confronted by the brutish reality of his fellow recruits? Did he perhaps gain law enforcement bona fides as a military policeman before embarking on civilian life? Did he start with the Pinkerton Detective Agency and then strike out on his own? Or did he pick this line of work on some perverse whim? So these questions can just help your player just flesh that character out a little bit. After that, we get Dex's character sheet, and there is a full, so I'll show this here. There is a full printout at the back of the book. And you can see his investigative abilities and his general abilities as well. After that, we are going to meet his sources. So in Cthulhu Confidential, you have sources which can help you overcome some lack of knowledge that you have. Because there's only one player character, they can't know everything. Well, realistically, they can't know everything. But they have sources that they can go to for help. So the first one is Virginia Ashbury, who is a scientist. And she treats Dex like a younger brother, despite the fact that she's actually younger than Dex. She helped Dex on a case a few years back, and she is a workaholic, always in the lab. So through Dex, she can have a glimpse at the seedy world, which she avoids through her work. Up next is Madame Eva, who is a fortune teller. She is a grifter, a harmless grifter, who can give Dex information on the world of cults and spiritualism and hermetic magic. He plays her role as a fortune teller very flamboyantly, and she always begins by telling Dex that the occult side is all a sham, all a part of a grift, like herself. But she will admit that there are a few stories she can't explain, and if Dex needs some help with anything relating to maybe Cthulhu mythos, she's the one to go to. Up next is Dr. Jeff McIntosh, or nickname Mac, great name, who is a shrink. When his patients need a private eye to look into something, Mac sends them to Dex. And then he allows Dex to kind of toss ideas around with him. And he is a shrink, but also trained as a medical doctor. So he might secretly be able to help remove a bullet from Dex in case Dex can't get it done officially. Up next is Alfred Kelham, who is an English literature professor at UCLA and Dex's former mentor. Dex helped out a friend in the past who was being accused of smuggling antiques. And so since then the Professor Kelham's door has always been open to Dex. He treats Dex like a son, and his own son was actually killed in World War One. And finally we have Max Whale, I hope I'm saying that right, who is a production designer. He's short but impeccably dressed, and he used to work at a studio, a film studio in Berlin, but as a gay Jewish man he decided to get out. Remember, this is set in 1937, and he came over probably in the about 1934. He can help Dex with any information about the art world. Dex helped one of Max's friends with a blackmail case last year, so Max is always happy to help Dex. And Max has a great network of connections, and he can draw on favors from people in all walks of life, so very, very useful for Dex to know. After that, we get some useful lingo to use. Some of this is maybe a little bit too far gone, and if you or your player are using it, it might actually just slow it down if you can't understand what the other person is saying, but it's always nice to have the option. And there's also some bibliography to help you set the tone, set the mood, get in that real confidential LA Confidential kind of tone for your game. Just before we move on to the next section, there is a larger discussion about whether Dex needs to be a straight white guy. For some people, this maybe didn't come up as a question. They were just like, yep, that's fine. You can ignore this if you want. But for people who want to change maybe his race, his gender, anything like that, there's actually a really well explained and logical reason why he, in this first scenario, is a straight white guy. Basically, we are used to seeing straight white guys getting, the detective getting into scraps. So, for example, such a character getting beaten up by the police, we just accept that that's because he's putting his nose where it doesn't belong. Whereas some players might be particularly off-put by police brutality against a person of color, and they might not be able to see it as it's because he's putting his nose in where it doesn't belong. It might be because he's black, for instance. Equally, violence against women or marginalized groups could be very difficult topics for people. So that's why they set up, especially with this first character, for Dex to be a straight white guy. Of course, you can feel free to change these aspects. This is a role-playing game, so pretty much you can do what you want. But it's suggested that you play Rex as a straight white guy for this first scenario. The next two scenarios, the second scenario features a female detective, I believe, Vivian Sinclair, and there is also in the third one, Langston Montgomery is a black male investigator. So the game does provide a variety of experiences, but maybe just for the first one, I would recommend, and the game seems to recommend, that you play Dex as a straight white guy. Great. So after that, we are going to get an introduction to Hardboiled L.A. I won't go through all of the details here because there's quite a lot, but it's broken up first into some important characters and then the layout of L.A. So first we get an overview of some gangsters, some cops and politicians. And actually, I believe all of the people mentioned here are real life personalities in 1930s LA. So Guy McAfee is the head of the gangland, and the crime syndicate is known as the System. There's an out-of-town mobster, Benjamin or Bugsy Siegel, who's trying to nudge in on his territory here. The mayor, Frank Shaw, is pretty tight with Guy McAfee, and there is plenty of corruption in LA. There's a lot more detail and some of the lower down people there as well, but I'll just leave it there for the moment. There is also a section on prophets and cultists. For example, there's broadcast evangelist Amy, I think, Amy, Semple McPherson, and then we have a real proclaimer, the real brimstone, what would you say? The real brimstone speaker, we'll say, Robert Pierce Schuler. And there's also an interesting character, Archbishop John Joseph Cantwell, who really helps to embrace the Mexican American population there, and he shelters Mexican bishops who are trying to escape away from traditional religion. But Manly Palmer Hall founded the Philosophical Research Society, which is an excellent library about occult lore. Whereas on the other scale, on the side of the scale, I guess, Wilfred Talbot Smith can instruct anything to do with sex magic. After that, we move on to Tinseltown a little bit, so we can learn about MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, and other production companies, and the key people involved there as well. After that, we move on to various locations. There is a breakdown of Griffith Park, Pasadena, Bel Air, Beverly Hills, Hollywood, Chavez Ravine, Echo Park, Malibu, Santa Monica, Silver Lake, Glendale, Bunker Hill, Central Avenue Corridor, downtown LA, and Downey. Long list there. Some of these get a longer description than others. For example, downtown LA has lots of subsections, including Chinatown. And other places, for example, Echo Park, I think is just a short little excerpt there. But all of this is more than enough for you to help create a really deep and vibrant Hardboiled LA. Personally, I would give all of the information so far to my players beforehand, and they can read as much or as little as they want to help them get immersed in the setting. There are a lot of plot suggestions or thread hooks for future adventures, so I might just remove them before giving the information to my players, just in case I decide to use them for future things. So now we'll move on to the Fathomless Sleep, and this is the scenario set in Hardboiled LA with our investigator Dex Raymond. So from here on, there will be spoilers. I would say more so than in other role-playing games. Cthulhu Confidential, if you know the spoilers, it will be ruined. So if you are a player who hasn't played through this scenario yet, please stop watching here. You will just ruin the experience. If you've already played through it, please feel free to watch this, but I'm not sure will you get much out of it. If you're a GM considering running this, yeah, have a look and you'll be able to get an overview of the scenario. So first we are introduced to the characters of this game, and this took me a little bit of time to wrap my head around. On the next page you'll actually see there's a relationship map here, but this still confused me a little bit, so I actually made my own mind map to understand it properly. But what I would say, this is maybe the number one piece of advice I would give for running this scenario. Before you read this, go on to the next page, this timeline of past events. Read this first, and then it will be much easier to understand what is going on here. when I was reading through this, it didn't really make a huge amount of sense to me. But if you read the timeline of past events first, much easier. So I feel this should have been the first page, and then after that you get introduced to the characters. Obviously you change a few details. The third scenario in this book also has the same problem, is that it introduces the characters and then later presents the story so far. But the second adventure presents the story so far first, and I found that much easier to follow. So I hope in future publications they start off with the story so far. So in this adventure, most of the events of the mystery have already happened, and so it's your job, or Dex's job, to figure out the mystery. The mystery, in a sentence, of this scenario is: Margaret Deacon wants you to find out what has caused her sister, Helen Deacon, to go crazy. So let's quickly go through this timeline, and I'll just brush through it, but the main points. So about 2 years ago, Margaret and Helen's mother died. Their father, Roscoe, takes it pretty hard, starts gambling and drinking, building up debt. Margaret, the level-headed one, takes over running the business. She then pays off Roscoe's debts, mostly to Whitey Alexander, who's a local casino owner. Roscoe gets into more debt, that's the father, gets into more debt, and Helen, the other daughter, starts dating Whitey to protect her father. Helen pretends to break up with her boyfriend, Marshall Daly, but they keep seeing each other in secret. Helen talks to Whitey's accountant and finds out that Whitey has not been paying all of the money that he should be to Guy McAfee, the head of the mob. And soon after, an out-of-town gangster starts hitting up Whitey for money. Guy McAfee wants some dirt on the intruding gangsters, so he hires an ex-cop, Ed Palais, to follow Mickey Cohen, who is one of the muscle for the incoming gangsters. Palais gets some incriminating photos of Mickey and tries to catch up with him again, but Mickey ambushes him and beats him up. Mickey takes him to Roy's garage. Roy generally disposes of bodies for Cohen and the other incoming gangsters. They don't know how he does it. He just gets rid of bodies. But what Roy does is he drops them into a ghoul pit. If the human is dead, the ghouls will just eat him. And if the person is alive, then their mind will be shattered by the experience of being exposed to ghouls. So Palais, the ex-cop, is released, but his mind is shattered and he has no memory of this. Whitey gets threatened by mobsters again, and as a reaction he lashes out and he beats up Helen. Now she starts fearing for her life because her boyfriend, the casino owner that she's dating to protect her father, has a real temper. So she's thinking of a plan to get rid of Whitey. The next time Bud Barron, the gangster, comes into the casino to lean on Whitey, Ellen intercepts him and they make a plan to meet later and discuss it. Mickey picks her up and they go to Roy's garage to discuss it. Mickey talks to his superiors and they get the go-ahead. So then Helen wants to get some proof that Whitey isn't paying all the money he should to the mob boss. So she starts hitting on his accountant, Phil Block, and gets him to make copies of the account books so that she can use the originals to put Whitey in trouble. Excuse me. Around this time, Mickey finds that Ed Palais is still alive, but his memory's been wiped. So he asks Roy about it, and Roy says he has created a special moonshine which will wipe people's memories. He decides not to mention the ghouls. Helen gives the books to Mickey, and she goes off to get a spiritual reading, and she meets up with her secret boyfriend, the last time either of them see her. Then Helen gets impatient waiting for the out-of-town mobsters to act on the information that she gave her. She tries to approach the new mob boss about why he hasn't taken action yet. But Mickey intercepts her and brings her to Roy's place for some special moonshine. And so, at this case, Mickey believes that it's just special moonshine that will erase her memory and leave her fine apart from that. So that's basically the story, and Margaret notices her sister missing, and after a few days files a missing person report. Then finally, after about 2 weeks, they find her and take her home, but she is in a terrible state mentally after being exposed to the ghouls. And after waiting for about a month and not seeing any improvement, Margaret comes to Dex Raymond to find out what happened in hopes that knowing that can help cure her. So that's where we are. Now that you know the timeline, if you want to have a look at the relationship map, it becomes a lot easier to understand, or even if you want to go through a little bit of information on each of the characters. Okay, phew. So that is a lot, and it might seem a little bit complicated, and it might also seem that this is not a great first scenario for a GM to run, but actually I think it is. It just requires a bit of preparation on your part, the GM. So what has happened so far, it's a little bit complicated, but it's already set in stone because it's in the past. The player will go around and trying to find out information about what has already happened. Obviously there are still some future things to figure out, but all of the things that I've mentioned so far have already happened. So some people might feel it's a little bit on the railroady side, but I don't think it feels that way for the player as they're kind of like uncovering this mystery. And after this, we get a map of the different scenes here. So there's a definite start. A dame comes into your office, so that's obviously where we start the story. That's where we get our motivation to go out and find anything. And there is also the resolution, the hole, where we find out about the ghoul pit. And there are, apart from the opener and the resolution, there are mainly two types of scenes. There are core scenes, which are slightly bolded here in white, and there's alternate scenes. So the core scenes are all the scenes that you need to get the main clues to move the story along. Alternate scenes are totally optional, but they help flesh out the story, give a bit more depth to both the story and the world. Right here, the scene names won't make much sense to you at this stage. So you'll have to read through the entire scenario and then come back, and now these will make more sense to you. So when you're running the game, this scene flow is a great assistant just to kind of follow where they are going to go. And just one small gripe. In the first and third scenarios in this book, all of the scenes are listed in this little diagram as core or alternate. And this is great to understand just at a quick glance. In the second scenario, however, the same map doesn't list them as anything. It just has the name of the scene. However, throughout the scenario, they are listed as core or alternate. I think it's just an oversight that happened, but it's a pity because that scene flow map is very helpful for when you're running the game. So as there are so many scenes here, we'll just run through the core scenes. Some of the other ones are interesting, but we don't have time to go through everything. So it starts off with, and I'll say on this page, and you can just kind of follow where we go from here. So Margaret Deacon comes into Dex's office and asks for help about her sister. Word on the street is that Dex is an upright guy who gets the job done. She gives the basic details as she knows it, but she withholds anything that would bring her family name into disrepute, such as gambling or any connections with the mob or casinos. And if Dex has the problem lonely, he might have to fight the urge to be smitten by Margaret. So at the start of the game, your player will choose from one of 4 problems to kind of give a bit more depth to his character, and lonely is one of them. So he might be really smitten by Margaret. So after this, we could either go to Typewriter Alley, which is where Marshall Daly Helen's boyfriend, like, and not the casino guy, works, or works. Or we could also go to the Order of the Silver Light. So this is where Helen has her spiritualist. So sometimes she goes there for spiritual readings. And this information we've got from Margaret. So we can go to either one of those. Let's go to Typewriter Alley first. So you decide to go visit the boyfriend. He lives in a motel. Dex can kind of just sneak in or even just walk in as well. You can also decide to shadow him a little bit first to see where he's going. When they first meet, Marshall doesn't trust Dex because he's been being followed recently. If Dex uses a reassurance push, you can calm him down. Otherwise, there's a fight. After this, you can earn his cooperation. So if you win the fight, you're kind of like not exactly beating him into submission, but he kind of relents and he tells you what's going on, or you can convince him that you're not involved. Or even if you lose, you can convince him with another social interaction skill. And so then he starts telling you, or he can answer any questions for you. He says, yes, he was involved with Helen, but not seriously, and neither of them were exclusive. When he heard that Helen was missing, he went to visit the house, but Margaret didn't want him there. He didn't know that she had been found, so as far as he knows, she was still missing. And if Dex tells her about her condition, he is shocked to hear about that, and maybe a little bit angry and hurt that Margaret never told him. He would never hurt Helen, he says, and he has no idea really who would be behind it. All he knows really is that Helen sometimes went to the Order of the Argent Light, and once he found a casino chip from the Allegria, a casino, in her pocket, and it was a high value dollar chip, so he found it a little bit suspicious that she would have it. So there's two leads there as well. One is going to the Order of the Argent Light, or the Silver Light, and the other is leading to the Allegria casino. So another tiny oversight here, and maybe this is just a change from the original to the final one, is that sometimes they refer to the church, the order, as the Order of the Silver Light, and sometimes they refer to it as the Order of the Argent Light. Obviously argent comes from, at least anyway, the French, but many other languages as well, meaning silver. The meaning is all the same. I think maybe they just hadn't finally decided which one they want to use, just in case you're getting confused about that. So there is a little bit of a sidetrack here about Marshall Daly being a communist and being tailed by some people, but we won't go into that. That's one of the sidetrack things. So next up, as it was mentioned at the start and again by Marshall Daly, let's go to the Order of the Silver Light. So Clara Nabel is the leader of the order, and she actually does have some genuine mystical abilities, but she usually relies a lot on cold reading to impress clients. During the conversation, she keeps with Dex. During the conversation, she keeps kind of steering the conversation towards mysticism, and she's also trying to subtly throughout the conversation find Dex's weak points, because she wants to maybe subtly get him to join the cult, or get him interested in it, and this can be a lot of fun to play, to role play as the GM. Don't be like way over the top about it, but just kind of ask some probing questions based on how the character is playing him. And remember, she's very good at cold reading. So she can tell Dex, if he asks the appropriate question, that Helen joined the order about 2 years ago, and she had been spiritually lost before this because of the death of her father and her gambling and drinking father. Did I say because of the death of her mother? Did I say father? Because of the death of her mother and the gambling and the drinking of her father. And she has always been drawn, possibly because she has an inconsistent father figure, she's always been drawn to older, powerful men. And Clara tells Dex that the worst of these examples is Whitey Alexander, who is the owner of the casino. So at this stage, we're really being pointed towards the Allegria from both Typewriter Alley and also the Order of the Silver Light. So let's go to the Allegria. So Dex chooses to check out the casino. If he uses his streetwise, he knows that Whitey Alexander runs it, and that he's somewhat involved with the gangster Guy McAfee, and the LAPD always looks the other way. Whitey is known as a mobster who will treat you well unless you cross him or interfere with his profits. Dex may have to try to avoid giving into gambling through a challenge here, again, potentially depending on his problem that he has. As he's walking throughout, he passes by someone who looks like they know something, they want to tell something, but they can't kind of approach him here. This later will lead to the Money Man scene with Phil Block, the accountant. But Dex stalks his way into a meeting with Whitey, where Whitey says that yes, Helen was his girl, and he wishes he could help her. If it's brought up, he's a little bit offended by the suggestion that she's only dating him to wipe off her father's debt. He a little bit vain. He likes to think that maybe she likes him for his personality, or maybe his looks. He angrily denies ever laying a hand on her if Dex brings it up, even though he did. And Whitey suggests that maybe her breakdown is due to that witch of hers, referring to Clara Nabel at the Order of the Silver Light. So that's kind of like the main information that you'll find here. You can also find out a little bit through hints that Whitey is having a little bit of trouble with the incoming mobsters as well, trying to press him for money. And that leads to the next kind of big event here. When Dex is leaving, it's a little bit of a red herring kind of scene where Bing Crosby's car is blown up outside the casino. And I think Whitey is outside to kind of explain and to calm down Bing Crosby, to say this wasn't about you, this is sending a message to me. So that kind of like hammers home the point that there's other mob stuff going on here as well that maybe Dex should look into. But let's move on next to the Money Man. So if he finds out about, and as you can see here in the Money Man, there are many other ways to get down here through the alternate scenes, which we're just not going through right now. But the suspicious looking guy who looked like he had something to say in the casino is Whitey's bookkeeper, Phil Block. And so if Dex catches up to him and asks the right questions, he finds out that Helen had started making eyes at him and he couldn't resist. When he agreed to meet her in a hotel room, he found out that she just wanted the account books, but at this stage he was already so smitten and he couldn't refuse. But then once he handed over the books to her, it was like he didn't even exist to her anymore. So he feels a little bit used. That's the main information you're going to get there. And so the next thing is the squeeze artist. And so this is talking about the other gangsters kind of like putting the squeeze on Whitey. So you'll have various bits of information that lead you to here, but Mickey Cohen and Bud Barron, and they're putting the squeeze on Mickey, often hang out at A.M. Hillier's, which is a magazine and newspaper distribution company, which is really just a front for organised crime. Dex can get information by either talking to Barron directly or searching about the building. If Dex gets to talk to Barron, Barron opens up about leaning on Whitey and working for Siegel, the out-of-town mob boss. But he kind of says it subtly, like, yeah, in the magazine business, you know, you have to sometimes get tough with your competitors. And he will also open up that, yeah, Helen gave him that information and it was more than they could ever have hoped for. he also feels that she was making eyes at him as well. Maybe she wanted to date him, but he's he kind of knew that she would do that for anyone who could help her. It's not love, or lust, just a way to get up. And he has a rule that he wouldn't mess with any connected men's women. So he decided to let Mickey handle her. Alternatively, if Dex gathers information secretly at night around here, he can find documents pointing to the mob connection and some moonshine jars, which may come up later. So by this point, everything has kind of flown reasonably well, but you do have to make sure that the players know about Mickey at this point. So probably finding out from Bud Barron. So at the end there, I mentioned that he said he let Mickey handle her. So I would probably hammer that point home a little bit, or possibly even get Barron to give Mickey's address or something like that, because this is maybe a core scene. So Mickey knows a guy. So at this stage you can follow Mickey and he will eventually go to Ray's garage, or you can just talk straight to Mickey. Mickey is very strong but not so smart, and he can't read. Helen gave them the plans and later the books. She got mad that they were waiting so long to use them. And Mickey mentions that they met first to work out the details and then to hand over the books, and third at the garage in San Bernardino to calm her down. He was like, yeah, Roy is the owner, and Mickey says he uses that place for out-of-the-way meetings and even sometimes chopping stolen automobiles. He doesn't mention that this is where he goes to drop bodies. After a little bit more pushing, the player can find out that Mickey gave Helen some of the special moonshine, and so he'll explain about this. And Mickey can also be defensive, saying that Helen was out of control and going to confront a mob boss in public, she would be dead. The special moonshine just cleared her memory, so he actually saved her life. And his assumption, and it seems genuine, is that the girl will recover eventually. And by that time, the mob will have taken action, so she can chirp away all she wants. And he's basically saved her life. So at this stage, everything should be pointing towards the garage here, or the moonshine, at least, and out in the garage. And so we move on to the hole, which is the conclusion scene. Dex can stake it out if he wants, but Roy knows he's there, so if or when Dex goes in, he's going to get jumped. There's a few minor ways around that if the player is taking extra care, but pretty much this is how it's going to go. Dex might get distracted by moans coming from the trunk of a nearby car. And this is a man who is almost beaten to death. It is Burl. So I'm not sure if we spoke about Burl before. And no, I don't think so. So that's fine. Anyway, it's not important. Just beaten to within an inch of his life and probably dying. So while Dex is distracted by that, or at any other distraction, Roy tries to attack. And this is a challenge, and Dex has to try to roll to see if he can avoid the, I think, is it chloroform? No, it's a bat, or not. If you succeed, if you get an advance here, you're going to be on top of him and beating him. He'll plead with you to stop, and he'll tell you all the truth. If you lose, he's going to put you in a cage, which he's going to lower into the pit. And while he's doing that, he will explain it to you. So either way here, you're going to get a bit of an explanation from him. He says that he works in body disposal for the mob, and he throws bodies down into the pit. The ghouls come out and eat them, destroying the evidence. They also bring up some interesting treasures for him, and that's one of the excuse me, that's one of the alternate scenes there as well. He doesn't say this, but they don't eat living humans. People just go mad from being around them. So you might be sacrificed here. You could also, if you're winning, you could sacrifice Roy to the ghouls if you want. And you might lose your mind, and if you fight, you might die as well. So there's lots of different ways that this can play out, and depending on your roles and what you decide to do, yeah, that's where it goes. And so Roy is kind of like the only one really involved with the mythos here as well. As far as everyone else is concerned, he just kind of disposes of bodies for them. So at this stage, you want to report back to Margaret. So you go back to her, you tell her whatever you want to tell her. Maybe you might just say it was the moonshine, or you could try to explain the ghouls. It's not clear if she'll believe you or not. But if you do something to try and fill up the hole, or to have the hole collapsed, Helen or Margaret will report that Helen is starting to feel a little bit better and have a little bit of hope for her. And after that, you just have to wrap up the loose ends and then give the reins over to the player to give an emotional coda to the end of the scenario. So if you remember, the player will look at the problems that they have and the experience that they've had over the scenario, and then kind of have a voiceover monologue as the camera kind of pans out, a traditional film noir kind of style. Okay, so that is the first scenario in Cthulhu Confidential. Let me get out of this screen sharing so the spoiler warning can go off. I stopped the recording instead of stopping the sharing there, but so that's the scene. I think it's actually very straightforward, even with all these alternate scenes. Very, very straightforward to run for a GM. The only problem is you do need to know the whole setup and the past events relatively well, and who knows what before running this. So, as I say several times in Cthulhu Confidential, it's more heavily based on preparation than it is on improvisation. Apart from that, I think it's a nice investigative game for the players. They can gather a lot of information and slowly uncover the mystery. If you are listening to me going through the core scenes, you might feel that it's a little bit short, or you might feel that there are some places where it doesn't necessarily directly lead to this. I did skim over the details a little bit just to give you the main outline, but realistically, your player will probably follow up some of the other alternates as well, which will help bulk it out. But I think it's just right. It's a very easy introduction to the gaming system, and you can find out if you like it or not. So the next one that we're going to be looking at is with a female investigator, the second scenario, and it is called Fatal Frequencies. So we'll have a look at that in the next video. But for now, that's everything from me. So if you have any comments about this, try to avoid any spoilers, but leave your comments down below. All right, that's everything for now. Thanks, everyone. See you.